All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Welcome to the show, everybody. Today I have an up-and-coming writer as my guest, Jake Curtis, who has worked with me on the Looking Glass Wars. He wrote a lore story, kind of the introduction of the House of Cards and the Card Soldiers. It was a brother story, and he did a terrific job. It's a story that's going to go along with a tabletop game that I've been working on, the Card Soldier Wars. We've also conceived of a romantic comedy idea, movie idea. And the reason that I'm excited about that is because he comes from a family of writers, and his father wrote one of my favorite romantic comedies of all time, Notting Hill. They don't make those romantic comedies anymore, but Jake is going to. So Jake, welcome to the show. I'm excited to chat with you about all things Alice and romantic comedies. Hello.
Hello. Doing good over here. How are you?
I'm doing well. I just got back from Vegas with my daughter where we bonded up over soccer. You ever play soccer when you were a kid?
I do. Yeah. I mean, it's mandatory. I still actually I won man of the match last time I went home.
Oh, you did?
We have a big new Christmas Boxing Day game, like the day after Christmas. We have a big soccer game every year, and I honestly was incredible this year. I'm usually pretty bad.
Did you play from a very young age? And was it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it matters so much in England. Like, we had 3 terms at school, and 2 of the 3 were dedicated to soccer.
Wow.
The third was like wild card sport. You do like rugby, cricket, anything else, but it was like, no, 2/3 gonna have to be.
Yeah.
So I love it. I remember once hearing someone saying the beauty of soccer is that it doles out joy and misery in equal sharings. I was like, sure.
That's so true. Well, this podcast is not called All Things Soccer, but I could do a podcast on all things soccer, just from my daughter's perspective. I've learned a lot. But, normally we talk a lot about Alice in Wonderland, but lately I've been really interested, and almost always actually, I'm interested in people's creative journey. In your case, I'm interested in, a young writer origin story, how one comes to their creative process and aspirations. And having worked with you and being introduced from my friend Ed Dector, I thought we would start from the beginning of your life, from birth, and when you came out. What were you thinking about writing? No, but honestly, where did it all start in terms of writing?
Yeah, I've pretty much always done some kind of performance and things. I come from a big family of writers and artists who are all too loud for their own good. And so it was very much growing up. It was like, you gotta learn to talk fast and talk loud, otherwise.
And compete. Was that at the dinner table, or was that all 24/7?
Oh yeah, no, 24/7, whatever it is. We used to say that everyone was unconditionally loved, but not everyone was unconditionally liked, and that you would get the love, but you had to
You had to perform to be liked and appreciated.
Yeah, something like that. But I really came to performing and writing from improv, actually. I started doing a lot of improvised comedy when I was sort of 12 and 13 and onward. And which was huge for me because I'm quite an anxious person in general and kind of an analytical person. And so just the chaos and acceptance that has to come with improv was pretty huge for me, of just like being like, there's no second draft, there's no planning.
There's no getting out of it. I mean,
There's no getting out of it.
there's no bailing. I mean, I thought improv was the most terrifying concept I'd ever heard of. I just like, no, 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 I'm not going to get up on stage and then somebody's going to tell me some little story and I'm supposed to go from there. I admire the chutzpah at 12, but I suppose at 12 it's like sink or swim, and so much stuff is going on at that age.
Yeah, you just and I was a big lover of live comedy shows. Like I used to
Okay.
go to a lot, and England, especially then, had a really vibrant live comedy scene. And going up to the Edinburgh Fringe at young ages, you see all these shows, and I think I became like first obsessed with the idea of an audience. Like I think that was always the bit that gripped me. It's not so much the like glitz and glamour of a million followers, but it's like the getting to watch these people who can walk into a room where 20 people are sitting down and connect with them and grip them and entertain them for an hour. Like I've always thought, I think I've always approached writing from an entertainer perspective, that just like we're all dancing monkeys, trying to make something fun. And so, yeah, so improv was really the way I got in. I just did that for years, and it excited me. And I got to kind of go around the world a bit. I got to do shows in Canada and the US. And
Wait, wait,
um,
wait. You have to back up. When you say you were traveling doing shows, so there was something more structured than you getting up there as a young person and doing something in front of class, or you were
it was,
part of a troupe, or
yeah, so at the start, I was part of a troupe, a thing called School of Comedy, which is an amazing company in the UK that gets professional sketch writers to come in, but then they have a troupe of kids to perform the sketches.
oh wow.
And so, yeah, so I joined that group and worked with them, and we did shows up in Edinburgh for 2 years, and and we would, yeah, perform around the country at festivals and comedy gigs, and that was an amazing experience of like being treated, because it was very much like being treated like we were a part of a professional show. We were an asset and a commodity and a member of the troupe, and they were lovely and respectful, but also it was like you have an expectation. There are people out there who have come to see a show, and you are the people to deliver it.
So
It's
you
not your
have to
fault.
entertain them and be on, and this is show after show. How many shows would you do a day, or?
I mean, when we went up to Edinburgh, we would do a show every day for 30 days or for 21 days, which is the length of the Fringe. You run a full run there. And then generally, shows would pop up. You'd have a week with a couple of shows or a little run, some theater, and then a couple months without a show. But we were working, and it was definitely just, I think the great thing was that it gave this idea of like, you have to accept how the audience reacts. There's no, like, I think and I think a lot of writing classes and just creative media shares this message of like, oh, you've got to tell the story that's yours. You've got to find your soul calling, or your this or that, which is wonderful. And like, people need to be told that, but I think it does sometimes remove the audience from the question. And it tells you to find the thing you think is funny. But I loved performing to live crowds, because you're reminded that if you think it's funny, it doesn't really matter that much. If they don't, and we'd go out into shows where we have sketches that have been written for us and that have killed, 5 shows in the last 5 shows, and you deliver it and the crowd doesn't like it. And you can either just say, well, this is my sketch, I'm going to keep going, or you can try and change it on the spot, try and shake it up, try and work out what this crowd needs from you, from the show, to shift it.
Obviously, when it's going well, it fuels you, and you can kind of charge, and you will take chances, and it's invigorating. When there's a lull or quiet, or you feel like the audience is leaning back and they're not engaged, for me, I had a sense of panic when I was doing some plays, not improvising, but just as plays. And I went, oh, it's one of those. And I would get into my head on the negative side, and trying to find a way, a path out of that into the
Mhm.
next moment to be present was difficult, let alone if you're improvising. I guess if you're improvising, you can just go off in some crazy direction in the hopes that,
Mhm.
well, tell me what you would, how you would find.
Yeah, I mean that I've done shows that have bombed and kept bombing, to be
Yeah,
sure. There is not a there's sometimes you're in the mud and you've got to stay there. And in those shows I would just try and make as much eye contact with the people on stage as I could so you
right,
don't have to look at the crowd
right.
and just try and tell myself I'm here having a good time with my friend, not bombing and ruining these
These
people's
people's
evening.
hour.
Yeah, but generally, I think that like that, I always what I enjoy with the crowd is that I always just kind of took that as a challenge,
Hmm.
as like, and it's a challenge you can win,
Hmm.
and especially at most comedy shows, the people are there to laugh. They
Right,
want to come out and have a good evening,
right.
and I think it's yeah, like jumping forward now, I work as a writer, and it's all these decisions that you make are fueled by like, oh, we think that these markets might want a script that looks like this or this, whatever it is. And like I hate all of that
Yeah.
because it's not real. It's like, and you're like, oh, cool, maybe like I can do it. I'm a technician, but the when you have a crowd, it's like it's you and them. It's head to head, and it's like yeah, my panic mode was usually monologuing.
Hmm.
I'm like, if I'm getting stressed, I'm just gonna start talking and I'm gonna keep going until I hit something. I'm gonna move faster. I'm gonna go through more ideas until you find a little inkling of a laugh and then just grip onto that for dear life.
Is that what you did with your family? Is that what the competition was? People were gripping on for their life to find a little
100%.
kernel to get their, to be heard?
Yeah, 100%. You're waiting at the dinner table. You're like, come on, someone mentioned dogs. Someone mentioned dogs. Someone brings up the word dogs. You're like, that's interesting. Listen to what happened to me today. I went out and I met three dogs. You just kind of, yeah, you got to take your time when you have it. Um,
Wow, that must have been hard to even get the food and the drink down when
oh
all of
yeah,
that was going on. I mean, that's a diet in itself. Wow.
it's yeah. Someone else starts monologuing. You speed eat to try and be able to talk by the next time they're done. But yeah, I just loved the immediacy of improv and the presentness and the engagement. And it was like the idea. Yeah, for me, the like joy of making art is making it for a specific person or specific people.
And in a
And there's not,
moment, and in that moment,
yeah,
you were making art in that moment. There wasn't a committee telling you, I think this joke will work or that joke won't
mhm,
work. It's the audience is telling you instantaneously, which you don't get when you're writing a script for television,
no,
or that's an amazing, because you're basically writing on stage as you're going when you're
yeah,
improvising.
uh-huh. And I think it forces you to engage in the truthful fact that the majority of art is just people observing other people and enjoying it. Like I think there's this top tier of like if you can write a sentence so good that it is etched into history, if you can write to be or not to be, go for it. But the majority of art isn't the cleverest thing you've ever heard. It's some people watching, reading, whatever, some other people, and trying to enjoy it, trying to have a good
Yeah,
time.
it's the human experience and the connection to the human
Mhm.
experience, and which is kind of why it's interesting you describing your family, because so many stories are about the dynamic with family, and
Mhm.
it's very relatable. And so when you tap into something like that, you're going to engage and the audience in a meaningful way. So
Mhm.
your family dynamic sounds really exciting and really competitive, and set you up for, all right, I'm being creative all the time, not just when you're
Mhm.
improvising, but my whole family is creative. And you mentioned performing. So how were they? Did you have actors in the family? You said writers.
It depends. I mean, in the immediate family, we have a lot of writers. My sister's a writer, my dad's a writer, my little brother's a writer. My mum was a TV presenter in the 80s,
Oh,
which was cool. So she used to, we'd do little practice things of like playing songs in the car. And in between them, she'd be like, okay, you can like intro this one. And I'd have to be like, and this next song coming on is a smooth hit from Lionel Richie, and try and time it up to the intro of the song. But yeah, it was all just kind of, yeah, it was all just fun. And then in the extended family, they're also very loud. I have like 30 cousins on my mom's side, and we have actors, we have everything. But it was just, yeah, it was just a general feeling of trying to kind of have fun, trying to push yourself.
eh,
And I always just think I thought of that if I was going to be able to make a career in the arts, it would be partly from just muscle growth, just
mhm.
like how many reps can I get doing how many different art forms, how many different things. I spent so long doing comedy sketches. I don't do those anymore, but the experience of it filters into everything else that I do. So
And is that the genre that you've started to really hone? Is comedy, whether it's television or comedy, ideas for film, or
yeah, comedy definitely is where I kind of lean. That was where all my experience came from in improv. Yeah, I think these things are muscles, and I think especially comedy, I think people often underestimate how much of a muscle comedy is because people are so naturally funny, which they are. And like, but it is a very different thing being funny to your four friends than writing something that can slot into a specific scene in a specific script and still get a laugh.
oh, it's completely different. And when you're with your friends and you're saying it out loud, it can come or go. But when you write it down, then, people can judge, and the rhythm and the cadence of it. Somebody's got to perform it to really nail that cadence. So it's a lot different putting it on the
Yeah.
page
And
for
I think,
sure.
I sometimes hear writers, who are great writers and haven't done comedy being like, oh, I think I might, for my next script, just do a comedy. And it's like, that's great. And maybe it'll be amazing. But I think that, yeah, like I know the reason I'm good at comedy is I hope, 20% there is a natural something in me. But like, I did 100 appalling improv shows before doing 100 mediocre improv shows before doing 50 decent ones. And like, I have so many scripts that are so bad and so unfunny, and so many files on my phone, and stand-up gigs and improv and freestyling and like all of these. Like, this is the thing I've done the most, and I'm still mediocre to okay, depending
Right,
on the day.
right. Yeah, it's all the reps. It's the 10,000 hours. It's
Mhm.
the failing. It's the failing over and over that people, I don't know if they realize what a gift that is if you see it as part of the process, as the learning part of the process is
Mhm.
writing draft after draft, in my case, or, you know, trying to hone when you talk about, great comedians and you see their shows, and if you see repeated shows, I mean, they are so specific night after night. They're hitting every one of those beats. They're so worked out. It's kind of remarkable how specific they are
Mhm.
from performance to performance.
And that was a part of why I felt so lucky getting into comedy so early, and the fact that my family did treat it as a serious pursuit and as something that was worth me spending my time on, was that like I was able to go through a lot of that education and learning phase while I was at school in a kind of mindset of being like, this is the education and learning phase. And I think, because I think it can be really daunting that if you go through your life and you hit 24, 25, and you go, oh, maybe I want to do comedy in that, it's a 6 year path to being kind of fine.
Starting at 12 and starting to perform, it's not dissimilar to sports. I mean, you really,
Mm,
if you do it at a young age, it's so inherent by the time you get, in your late teens. It's instinctual, but you need all those reps. You need all of those times, all that
mhm.
time. And so, but starting young, especially starting that young, the filters are off, and so you're just doing it.
Mhm.
Um, And it's not as if you're 24 and I want to do comedy for my career. I wonder how that's going to work out. You've just been living it, and I think that makes a big difference. With your family being so into all of the arts, did you find that to be really nurturing, or is there a competitiveness, or is there an expectation that you feel moving forward?
I think, I mean, not so much. There's a competitiveness in my family anyway. I'm one of four kids, so we all do very fairly similar things. So there's a bit of a jostling, but no, I think it was very much sort of just like, if this is a path you want to go down, go down it. And we me and my siblings do similar stuff, but it's different. I couldn't do. My sister writes incredible feminist literature that I couldn't write, and my little brother writes very dark, edgy films that I also couldn't write. It very much, I think, was just, it wasn't as much a competitiveness, but it was more of a, if you're going, this is a legitimate career and a path you can take, and if you're going to go down it, take it seriously. Do it. Do it well. Put in work. Put in the hours. We'll take you. A lot like kids doing sport. They were like, we'll drive you to the classes.
Right.
We'll pick you up. We'll go see your games. But you've got to put your practice in. Put your head down. I think it wasn't treated as a fanciful thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of creatives, it's the family or the parents treat it as a fanciful idea and not dependable. And how are you going to survive in the world? And
I remember one time when I was like 16, we had these like national tests, and I did really well on the physics one. And I remember suddenly I had this like brainwave, ding idea thing where I was like, wait a second, could I be an engineer? I was like, oh my God, this is like a radical thought. I was like, I could have a steady paying job, career development.
Yeah. Nothing like my family.
I'd become the black sheep.
Wow. You're working for, Intel or something. And
Yeah, it would be bizarre for them. So it was always something I just appreciated and kept going at and kept trying to see where I could go at. And I did a lot of the improv. I got to do some shows that I loved. I did two 50-hour-long shows in Canada, with this group Dynasty, which was a great experience. And then it was really COVID that kind of ended that portion of my life. I was already writing a lot by then, but then when COVID happens, all improv obviously shuts down. And it's been in a, not more than most industries, improv took a really
big hit.
It turned out that the improv theaters weren't the people with big financial stores and genius, financial skills. So improv took a really hard hit there. And so it was then that I dived fully into writing, and I'd already been feeling like I've always enjoyed performing as an act for myself, but the actual performing in front of, needing to get my face out there was never a priority. So I just really tried to dedicate myself to the writing and to screenwriting as a way of building, a career that I would enjoy.
And why did you move from the UK to the US? Was that for educational opportunity reasons, or?
It was sort of for education. I was living in the UK until I was 19, and then I moved to Chicago to go to Northwestern University and study film there, which was an educational reason, but in something that feels insane now, I made the decision entirely based on improv. I was doing improv in the UK. I was doing what is known as Chicago style improv, which is long form, but Chicago is the mecca of that. You have the second city in the IO, and I Googled best colleges for improv, and some dude's blog came up, and he had number one. He had Northwestern and the Titanic Players, and I went, great, and I applied to two schools. I applied to Northwestern, And then I applied to Yale because no one in England had heard of Northwestern. And so I thought if I can get into Yale, reject them, then I'll tell people I chose Northwestern over Yale and they'll get that it's impressive. And then Yale rejected me. So it wasn't a great plan. But yeah, I just applied there and I went for the improv. And it honestly was amazing. I was this group, the Titanic Players, run by Mike Abdel Saeed, is an amazing, incredible organization, and I got to do so much improv at Northwestern that it wasn't the worst decision.
And then you had the city, so you could go to Second City, and then you could see some of the best, like you said, the Mecca, the best improv in the country. So you were getting your fix for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, getting to do shows downtown and bring in guest improvisers to teach workshops. It was an amazing experience.
And that's also it's a great city when you're 20 years old or 21.
Yeah, I don't regret the decision at all. I love Chicago so much, and it's a really, oddly enough, of everywhere in America I've been, it's the place that most reminds me of London. So I felt quite at home there, and it's just lovely people, lovely food, and the best improv. Well, some of the best improv in the world.
So who were some of the people that inspired you in terms of your comedy? You said you went to comedy shows, and who are some of the people that would have inspired your comedy writing? So
yeah, well, there's a lot of, the first people were a lot of English comedians and stand-ups that I doubt people listening to this podcast have heard of, but there's people like Daniel Kitson and Tim Key with these incredible people that would just do one person shows, like at Edinburgh Fringe, partly due to the financial situation. One person shows basically dominate, and it's amazing because they're so personal. It's come in and experience my world for an hour, and I hope you enjoy it. So I loved these very personal stand-up shows. And then, moving to Chicago, there was an incredible improv. TJ and Dave are like the greatest duo in Chicago improv history. They've been doing the same show for like 35 years. And if anyone gets a chance to see it, it's just that they are genuine masters. And to see two people so grounded and confident and they know each other too well. But honestly, my biggest inspiration watching it was American sitcoms, and that was kind of why I wanted to come to America. Was I just grew up watching The Office and Parks and Rec, How I Met Your Mother, all these shows, and they, for one, were just so phenomenal, and also made America seem so cool. I was like, yeah, this is great. I'll go to America and meet all these beautiful people and date them, 3+ season. And then it'll be great, and everyone's funny and everywhere's pretty and the sun's always shining.
And did you discover that?
I discovered it was exactly like that, and I have not been sad a day since arriving in America. It turns out that they're a little unrealistic at points.
So Chicago to LA. So what was the transition there?
Yeah, so then COVID happens.
Yeah.
I was in Chicago. I start writing more. I only had a year on my visa. I didn't know if I could stay in the country, and so I thought if I have a year, I should go to LA, the city of dreams.
Yep.
And I moved to LA. I got a job working for a motivational speaker, which was a weird experience, especially in COVID.
Why was that weird?
Well, it was just, there was a point where I was locked down in my house and seeing no one. And except once a week, I would drive to this guy's house, set up a camera, and he would motivationally speak at me for 1 to 2 hours. Because all of his stuff is just down the lens of the camera. And so I was just going from total solitude to this man just rambling about the meaning of life and passion and purpose. And then I was going back to my tiny empty house and editing more videos of him talking about the stuff. So it was just a bit of a jarring experience, but a wonderful one.
Did any of it stick? for
It,
you.
you know, it definitely it got in there. It's definitely deep in my subconscious. I can still hear his voice if I close my eyes. But yeah, so it definitely something stuck. But I was doing that for a year, and then I was working on my writing, but kind of felt like I needed more training, especially because so much of my experience had been in performance and had been in live comedy. So I ended up applying to grad schools to do a master's in screenwriting, and I got into the American Film Institute and ended up going there. And that was one of the best decisions I've ever made.
And how was
So
Ed Dector? He introduced us, and as a professor, what was the takeaway? The one thing that you have been able to put into action, or
yeah, I think there were kind of two things come to mind because I think the first, which was something that I really learned from Ed or from watching Ed, was the was where you can get to if you put in all this time into screenwriting. Because I think I had seen, I had so many examples of these great improvisers that I'd seen who have this, it seems like a superhuman ability to improvise, to like you drop them in a scene and they know where to take it and where to go. And it was seeing those people initially that made me want to do improv. I was like, that's like a superpower. Like
right?
you're just on the spot, you're ready to go. And I think it was amazing coming to AFI. All the professors who teach there have to also be working writers in LA. And Ed Dector, who I was lucky to get my second year, is a very prolific writer, has written so much stuff in so many genres. And watching him, we were a class of 6, writing 6 very different scripts, and watching him have immediate feedback for every single type of script, which was like 99% of the time was immediately correct, was an amazing thing to see. To just see that, like, we talk about scripts so often as like these hyper personal, the story only you could tell. But if you get a really good screenwriter, they know the direction a script should go from reading it. And getting to see that up close, getting to see someone kind of really just like be able to latch onto a story someone's trying to tell, work out the key elements, work out what's going to translate, work out what's not translating, and immediately know a direction to go in an instant, doing that as second nature. That was a really exciting thing of seeing people at AFI, seeing the professors, and that kind of got me excited and inspired, because I think it can be depressing, I find, as a writer, to think that your only option for success is writing your soul's calling.
Right.
Like, that's wonderful. I hope to one day write a film that is me in a bottle, but that's like a scary prospect and a weird, and if it's not coming on that day, it's not coming. And it was definitely going to AFI gave me much more of an approach of what a working writer looks like, of what a functional writer looks like, of someone who just gets the job done and who knows what a script needs.
And Ed has written a lot of sitcoms.
Yeah.
That's where he started. So he has experience in sitcoms, but the scripts that he's been writing lately have been adaptations of various kinds of, mystery novels, and he really is got a broad range of genres that he plays in. A couple of the latest sort of crime dramas that he's written were really startling to me, because I was used to, we did Something About Mary together, but also he's done so many sitcoms. That's what started his career.
Yeah.
So I can understand why you guys would have bonded up, and also the experience of seeing him jump from, genre to genre, script to script. I had this similar experience because we put a little mini room together that he ran to sort of break the Looking Glass Wars novels as a television show. And so we brought in a couple of writers, and then seeing him run the room was also another aspect of television production and writing and development that I hadn't seen before. And that was also really, was unique for me, because I hadn't had that experience, and taking my novel and then breaking it up and saying, okay, here's where we have to get to for the middle of the season, and here's where we're trying to get to at the end of this season. Okay, now let's reverse engineer it, and let's figure out what the best opening was pretty exciting, and then to have other people jump in, not dissimilar to what you did with My World in writing. I asked you to write a lore story,
Mhm.
and this idea came from you and a number of other young writers that I was introduced from AFI, who play all these different kind of games, the Dungeons and Dragons and
Mhm.
Magic of the Gathering, etc., and all the lore stories that go along with the games. And I thought, well, I want that. I want that. How do I get that? Well, they're right in front of me. So that was, had you, so you wrote this story, The Brothers
Mhm.
Wild, which
Yeah.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about. But the idea was a lore story, but written, it's written in a prose style.
Mhm.
And you did an outstanding job. Really, really brilliant, beautiful job. Um, and you used aspects of my universe and you made them feel fresh to me, which it's like Santa Claus showing up. And it's like, wait, how did you know that I wanted this perfect gift?
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience for me because it was, yeah, like you mentioned, I've played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons for a long time, and I love that world and the kind of high fantasy, but it never felt like something I was allowed to play in for like actual creative work. That was kind of my like treat on the side on the end of a long week. And so, yeah, getting approached to write something in a world of high fantasy, in a world that already exists, kind of pulling on the lore, trying to write backstories and think of where things come from, was such a treat for me. It felt like it felt like getting to do, yeah, my fun times for work. But it was also an odd process. Like um, I've never really written based on other people's world before and other people's work. And so it was interesting and fun getting into that and trying to see how much I could stretch. The odd thing for me was when I got into it, I was very excited and I was I'd written out all these the plot points and the beats, and I felt like I was confident in the story. And then literally as I opened up the Word document, I remembered that I hadn't written prose in like 7 years. I was suddenly,
Be careful
I
what you
thought
wish for.
yeah, I'd forgotten that it was a completely different art form. I kind of got ready to open up Final Draft, and then I was like, oh gosh. And it took a little bit of adjusting. I suddenly the thing I forgot the part that I forgot was that you can't refer to someone by the same name every time in prose. In a script, someone is their name and it does not change ever. It
Right.
is them and it but I was suddenly trying to like I was deep on synonym.com trying to be like the okay, come on, I can't say the great warrior again, the mighty fighter, the heroic hero. It was really I was going deep into my vocabulary to try and switch something up. But it was, yeah, it was an exciting thing to get to work in because I think, especially because Alice is a world that is so rich throughout culture and throughout, it's kind of a bedrock piece of of story. So, like, even there were things that I brought into the story that are pieces that are in Dungeons and Dragons. There's a lot of Alice in Wonderland lore baked into Dungeons and Dragons. There's Vorpal swords and Jabberwockies and those things all exist. So it's like this. It didn't feel like building on something completely new. It felt like being given a chance to play in a world that is so familiar,
Well,
which
as a
was
Brit too, right? I mean, Alice in Wonderland is probably the most famous piece of literature that you would have grown up with, right? I
yeah.
mean, other
Hmm.
than it, so I can understand. I can understand that, and also the idea that Alice is everywhere, and so
Yeah.
it of course it makes sense that it's in Dungeons and Dragons. But you took what was familiar from Alice's Adventures, Lewis Carroll's work. You took elements from my world, but then you brought this brother story together, which brings me kind of full circle to where we started this podcast about family and finding a connection between these two brothers. And tell us a little bit about that part of the story that you came up with, because you did often reference your, I think it's your younger brother or older brother?
Yes.
Your younger brother,
younger
right?
brother. I have two younger brothers who kind of got amalgamated in the story. But yeah, so I for me, like starting to write the story, I always try and start from a place of relationship of because I think that gives you the most fuel for a story, and also I think is the piece that you can't retroactively put in. You know, if you tell me this story needs a bigger fight scene, I can go do that at the end. But if a story isn't built around a relationship, it's tough to slot that in. So I wanted to build it around a relationship, and I was kind of looking at the House of Cards, which was where we wanted to focus it, and just thought that, you know, brotherhood made sense. You know, it's kind of this like military organization, and we have just the sort of the brotherly bond felt like it made sense. And I have two brothers who I fight with a lot, so that made that tracked. But then I was interested in this idea of the houses, and I loved the thoughts of the personality types associated with the houses, and thought, you know, me and my brothers are very different. I wanted, if I was like, if we're gonna have two brothers, let's put them in two different houses. Let's have them hate each other for the very reasons that make them unique. You know, put them, have this true, like if we're trying to expand the House of Cards, we've got to, you know, bake it into the DNA of the House of Cards. So I wanted to build around there. And then, so, you know, I came up with these characters who were kind of half brothers from a philandering father who they both hate. So there's this kind of tie, but no love between them. And at that point, they started to just feel real to me, and it started to feel fun. And at that point, it felt like playing, because you've built this world. You know, we have this amazing world of the House of Cards, and the sort of rituals and the dynamics that are built in. And that was such a gift to then just be like, to build these two brothers who hate each other, and then try and give them a situation to learn why they need each other.
Also, you know, you were tasked with an origin story, an early origin story of the House of Cards, and the House of Cards sending card soldiers on missions. And when they send people on missions, they decide what kind of hand they're going to be dealt into battle. And so you came up with, and it's called A Hand in History, the Brother Wilds, because it's the beginning of the card soldiers going on these various missions when they're tasked with, you know, saving the queendom or battling, you know, a competitive state or a state. So, and
I loved that idea of kind of basing it around hands that are chosen and selected, because to me that plays into the joy of Dungeons and Dragons and these old fantasy novels, which is the party, the troupe, that every story is based around who was selected to go on this journey. And I think that's what's so beautiful in a lot of these adventure stories, you know, including Alice in Wonderland, is that it's not the adventure that's the enticing bit, it's the uniqueness of who's going to solve the adventure.
Yeah, you know, and the skill set that they have, and seeing how they're challenged, and they use their skill set with these, you know, various obstacles that are unforeseen, and the workaround, and that's, you know, the Dirty Dozen idea.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of modern fantasy and films, in my opinion, go wrong, is that they put a lot of their energy into these big set pieces, these big boss fights, this big, you know, CGI characters, and the obstacles. They put a lot of time into the obstacles, when actually the thing we care about is the people solving them. You know, in the Lord of the Rings, you care about Frodo. You don't care that there are 9 Nazgul, and you know, it's like you care about the people. And I think that's what makes Alice in Wonderland so beautiful. And with your novels, is that they revolve around the people winning, the people going through them instead of the giantness of the battle.
Yeah, I mean, you want that because it's fantasy, but you need to be with the characters. And with Alice, I think it's so identifiable because, it's who am I on this journey, and she finds agency in who she is and pushing back against the illogical world that she finds herself in. But it's also it's also very amusing in the satire. When were you introduced to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say an individual date because it's everywhere. Because, especially in England, it is. Yeah, it was just a part of culture growing up. But I definitely, some of my earliest memories, I remember my mom and my dad reading me the book
Oh,
when I was little,
when you
which
were
was
how
lovely.
old? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. How old?
I must have been 10,
Oh, okay.
11.
Oh,
And then the 1951 film was something that I watched a lot. I love animation. I write a lot of animated stuff, and that film is just so kind of the specificity of the visuals and the tone that is so just kind of baked into that whole film. I loved that. It was a real inspiration for me growing up.
why do you think it's lasted so long? That you said it was in culture, and this is generations after it was first introduced, and every generation sort of reinterprets Alice. For you, how did you view Alice in Wonderland? Through what lens did you?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think the reason it lasts is that there are so many ways you can connect with it. Not everyone, it is such a beautiful human idea of like the girl who falls down who falls through the looking glass, and this idea of kind of getting swept away on an adventure. I think for me, the part that I like really gripped onto from a young age was the world building, was the idea of this world that it just like it works. It makes sense. It doesn't feel like someone who's picked, oh, this would be a fun scene and this is a fun character and that would look good. It lives and breathes like a world. And there's this great, I think something that really drew me to it is that I think a lot of world building goes dark, and goes into, oh, it's a grungy forest with scary people in it. And then obviously some other world building goes kind of saccharine and we're in heaven. But I think I loved the feeling in Alice that there's a danger to the world, but there's a wonder to it. There's a whimsy and a seriousness. And it just kind of the world feels like it shifts based on the situation, like ours does. There's no one thing to it. And so I just loved growing up. I just loved this idea of learning more about the world, learning the characters who inhabit it, the places to go, the people, and just being able to build this kind of escape.
I love the whimsy and the silliness of it. And it reminded me of another book that the Phantom Toll Booth,
Yeah.
which was one of my favorites growing up because of the silliness and the use of language and that aspect of Alice I really identified with. There are many people that think of it more as a nightmare because of the getting big and small and being stuck in a place where there's no logic. But
Yeah, and I think also that was the lack of logic I loved. Like that
yeah.
to make, honestly, like I know quite a lot of people who I would identify as crazy people. And they would as well. Like, we have a lot of fun mental health issues in our family. And I think so I always grew up with this sort of acceptance of that. Like this isn't, nothing's gone wrong. There are crazy people who exist in the world, and that's fine. And I think that Alice, in a youthful way, takes that on. The story, like it accepts. There are people here who are going to make some weird decisions, and and that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, it really does capture that. And then in terms of pop culture, you mentioned Dungeons and Dragons and the references. In video games, I've noticed that Alice has, a huge through line.
Hmm.
Almost every game I've ever seen, there's some Alice component, whether it's, checkered board motifs or
Yeah.
so. Do you have a kind of a favorite Alice in pop culture that you latched onto?
I definitely there's a few. I mean, yeah, the Dungeons and Dragons I enjoy, and the Borderlands is a video game I love that has a lot of Alice imagery. I think my favorite's probably the Arkham Asylum graphic novel, which I just love, and is this beautifully illustrated graphic novel of Batman going into Arkham Asylum and gradually becoming more and more insane, and just kind of losing his mind and his sanity, and it's very inspired by Alice in Wonderland, and there's all the kind of, which a lot of the villains in Batman already are. There's very much these threads of madness, and the Mad Hatter, and
Well, there is a villain, the Mad Hatter.
is the Mad Hatter
Right.
is literally a villain, and even just like the penguin, and that I there's all this kind of, the imagery lines up, and so yeah, this beautiful graphic novel of him just going progressively madder, surrounded by Alice in Wonderland kind of motifs and imagery is something I love, and I think that's, to me, what feels so special about Alice in Wonderland is that it can be drawn for inspiration for something light and for a younger audience, and airy and fun, but it can also be drawn to a very dark and disturbing graphic novel, and it works the same. It doesn't kind of, it's just a beautiful, I think that's what happens when you're able to create something that taps so deep into, on a human level, that it means you can use it in so many different ways.
And I think a lot of stories now are based on IP because one, people like stories that are familiar, told in an unfamiliar way, and on the business side, there's a recognizable aspect for the marketing. And I know this is not lost on you because you're working on an animated series that's based on Edgar Allan Poe, correct?
Mhm. Yes.
But your spin on it on is a little bit different. Is it something
Yeah.
that you can talk about or
Yeah,
broadly?
I've been working for a couple of years on a series called A Raven in the Woods that is, yeah, a kind of reimagining of Edgar Allan Poe. I loved Poe as a child. The kind of, I loved the language, the poetry, and the darkness, and similar to Alice, an acceptance of madness. I think that's where they kind of meet in the middle, is that it's Poe, like Lewis Carroll, doesn't treat his mad characters as nothing.
As
They're
negative.
characters.
Yeah, they're yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, they're not irrational. They are just who they are, and they are to be dealt with. So yeah, so I loved Poe, and I thought that there was something so visual in his language that I thought it deserved. I thought it paired well with animation. I think there's he writes in this incredibly emotive, twisted world, and I thought that could be best represented by animation, instead of, like, there's a lot of great live action adaptations, but they're all just kind of dark and gloomy rooms, which is technically accurate. But when you're reading Poe's work, it doesn't feel like a dark, gloomy room. It feels like a twisting shadow and a peering, lights, and so I thought it worked well with animation. So yeah, I tried to rework it, but I think that what I wanted to do more, I didn't want to do a direct translation or a direct thing, similar to how you engage with the Alice world. I wanted to bring the feeling of it and the parts of Poe that I love into a new story, into something that was new and worked as a standalone piece of animation for kids. So yeah, so it's based. It shows a young Edgar Poe trying to get his brother Alan through the woods before Alan is turned into a raven. Alan's cursed, and as they move through the woods, a lot of the people in the woods have gone mad. There's a sort of curse on the woods. There's a big mysterious overlord, and a lot of the mad people speak in rhyme and speak in poetry. And so it's this sort of adventure through the woods. And the way I kind of logicked it in my head was that this was the story. This was the real life adventure that inspired the later Edgar Allan Poe to write all his stories. That he actually wasn't very creative at all. He was just mining from this wild 2 weeks he had as a kid. And so it's got a lot of the characters and the elements and the moments, but it's its own story about a kid trying to deal with a lot of the themes that come up in Poe, themes of fear and being scared and how to overcome that, and how to deal with yourself, and the world when everything feels mad. So
not dissimilar at all to Alice, and I think that's really relatable and kind of answers the question that we often get from executives: is why now with this story? And given how chaotic the world feels, and it's great to deal with stories that are realistic to the anxiety that kids feel, whether it's the various wars they're reading about, or the climate, and like the fact that there's nothing that they feel like they can do about it. And I've noticed that with my kids. And so stories that are thematically around what you're talking about, I think is answers that question of why it's important.
I think we need this stuff now. I think we live in a chaotic time, and our art needs to reflect that. And thankfully, we're not the first people to have lived in a chaotic time. So there's lovely things in the past.
Yeah, and we're also trying to get grounded in what's real. And so one of the things about Alice in Wonderland, if you look back on it, it's just like, is this a dream? Is this real? This trying to parse out reality versus fantasy, facts versus fiction, which, as you know, we're dealing with a lot of late. So that sounds like a really exciting project. Where in the process have you, or did you put like
So I'm working with a producer, Rick Michelle, who's wonderful, and we've teamed up with Team Toe, who are a great French production company, animation house.
They're terrific. I love their animation. That's amazing. That's a real.
So they've been amazing so far, and also wonderfully French, which has been a great treat. On one of the first calls, they had, I think, the head of finance there, and she was just sitting 10 feet away from the camera stroking a cat, and I was like, this is the kind of stuff we need. So we're working with them and a director called Christian DeVita, who's an incredible director, has done a lot of Wes Anderson and Tim Burton stuff. And we're working on putting together a packet for it now, and then going out and trying to sell. So it's been a great process, and hopefully will lead somewhere.
Well, fingers crossed. We'll want to check back in with you, and certainly have you on the show when you need to promote it, because it's coming out in a couple of weeks. I'm curious about the romantic comedy genre. I would imagine that you know something about that, and it's been lacking. And it's one of the staples and one of my favorite movie genres. Why do you think we've lost that?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough question. My dad has made a lot of romantic comedies. He's a big that's his bag. And it's tough. I feel like there's very little to be learned from him, because the truth about him is he is literally the soppiest romantic person in the world. It is 100% genuine. That's how he talks, thinks, and breathes. But I think it's a really tough thing. I think it's a genre that needs to keep changing. Is one thing. Like, I think action is action, and you need to develop it. But honestly, action holds up. But both romance and comedy are things that develop as humans develop. You know, if you are romantic in the way people were romantic in the 50s, you'll probably get arrested these days.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And if you tell jokes that were funny in the 50s, you are not getting laughs, I promise. And so I think these are things that need to keep being pushed and reinvented, because I think both of them, the feelings of romance and the feeling of comedy, is something new. Is the feeling of being in love is, I've never felt like this about a person before. And so,
but the formula of the you know, of the cute meet and the tension, and they clearly are not getting along, and that there's a million miles to, you know, like one of my favorites.
Yeah, but we got used to the formulas. Like, I think that's the thing, is I think you can get used to the formula of an action film and it doesn't lessen it. But to me, at least, like comedies, when Harry Met Sally, I mean, it feels radical when you watch it. It's weird. It cuts away these things. It's skipping time. And I think these films have to feel unique, because it should feel like meeting a person, like meeting someone who's shifting your life. And I think when we get used to the tropes and the things, they can still be good for, you know, really deep, you know, if you want to make a romantic, you know, The Notebook works, you know,
Yeah.
that's like proper romance. But I think with a romantic comedy, it has to feel fun, it has to feel fresh, and that takes reinvention. And I think we're in a weird spot at the moment when no one's quite cracked it in a while. And I think you get I think we're all just really familiar with the tropes. Everyone watched these films. Everyone started acting like the people in these films. There's you get the procession of the simulacra. There's all these people pretending to be leading men from romantic comedies in the 90s and 2000s. And they're all on dating apps, and it's horrible. And like, you know, and you go on a dating app and you see 200 people's perceptions of who they are as a romantic lead back to back. You watch everyone label themselves as the Hugh Grant type, or the, you know, oh, I'm just a witty guy, or I'm the Billy Crystal who doesn't care. Like these things are so played out that I think you've got to find a way of making something feel weird and fresh and new. But that's really tough when we work in an industry that doesn't like taking chances on fresh and new stuff. And that also, you know, let's be real, romantic comedies live and die on the stars that are in them.
On the chemistry.
Usually.
On the chemistry.
Yeah, on the chemistry. And it's tough to get a weird, new, fresh take that also two stars are willing to sign on for, and they happen to have chemistry. I think it's a really tall order.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. And with all the dating apps, trying to find a way to make that at all romantic, it seems to be an impossibility. But also somebody will do it and it'll break out, and maybe there'll be a fresh take on it. But to your point, you know, we have all sorts of other genres that people are spending more time on. I just miss the chemistry between two stars. The Notebook is something, you know, my daughter has gone back to, and frankly, I've watched it, and it just works. Because both male leads are equally appealing, and so she really has a dilemma that you can buy into. But that was based on a novel that was highly successful. So the kinds of movies that your dad wrote were his own ideas, right? They weren't based on, it was, your dad had a romantic idea with, you know, for instance, your dad wrote Notting Hill, which was one of my favorites. And there's an ongoing joke with my wife's kids, my stepkids, because whenever they say, what should we watch? I'm like, well, what about Notting Hill? And I just say it over, and I've been saying it over and over and over so many times that they're like, they look at me like that is the dumbest joke ever. I go, but it's a good movie. I really like those two, because the chemistry between the two leads is so amazing. And
I remember once asking my dad, I said, did you know, when you were writing these films that ended up being big hits, did you know they were going to be hits? And he said, absolutely not at all. I really didn't feel it. I just kind of wrote and tried to stay passionate about it. And then he paused and he went, actually, not Notting Hill. He said, I was sitting at home and I thought, what if a movie star fell in love with a random guy? And I went, oh, that's a hit. Oh, yeah, that's done.
Well, and also you have Julia Roberts at the height of her stardom with that smile that would just crush anybody. And then you have, Hugh Grant, who's a very contained performer. And when those two come into contact, it's gold.
It's wonderful. But I think one thing that's worth looking at is that there are, I think romantic comedy is being explored in other mediums. In that, like successfully, like the show The Summer I Turned Pretty,
Yes.
smash hit for a younger audience, and that's a rom-com, essentially. And I think, like, even looking at something like Taylor Swift, her songs are romantic and amusing and comedic at points, and that has gripped people. Like, I think obviously the desire is there. Obviously the people want these kind of things. I think it's just it'll take someone breaking it a new way of doing it in movies.
Yeah, I think certainly in television. I mean, my daughter just keeps telling me, Dad, it's one girl, two guys. That's what you need to do. Just focus on teenagers, two guys, one girl, and that's the formula. So, because she's watched all those shows you've talked about. Hey, one other thing before we jump, you have a funny story about your grandmother knowing the Littles, Alice Little, which you have to share with us because that's the first time that I've come into contact with somebody whose family member knew the muse, the literal muse for all things Alice, for Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, for my books, for your writing of The Brothers Wilde. So tell us a little bit about that.
It's a bizarre and wonderful story. My grandmother, my mum's mum, Lady Jill Freud. She's an amazing woman. She's 96 or 97 right now. But so when she was little, when she was much younger, I think she was 6 or 7 when World War II broke out. And she was living in London at that time with her family, and they knew that London was going to be bombed ruthlessly. And so the British government enacted this thing that they called the evacuation, where and it's an insane thing to happen. It could never happen nowadays. They literally took every child in London, took them to a train station, put a number around their neck, just a little box thing saying it, and they put them on a train somewhere. They literally just shipped them off. And when they arrived at these stations, people from the local towns came to the station and just went, yeah, I can take 2. I can, or I can take I'll take 4. Someone would come and say, I run a farm. I can take 2 young boys to work there. It was and these kids just got rehoused for what was at that point an indefinite period of time. No one knew when the war would end, and it was just kind of wartime. You did what you had to do. And so she was sent to Oxford and taken in by this family, the Butlers. And Mrs. Butler was 100 and wasn't allowed to know that there was a war on because they were worried it would scare her. And so, but the house was run by these 3 Butler sisters, who were, like, 2 of them were university professors, and they were these 3 unmarried older women. And they had been 3 of the kids that Lewis Carroll, or Charles Dodgson, had had taken down the Isis when they were younger. And he'd done these long boat journeys and down the Isis, and he would read them stories every night, and he would write them stories and come up with stories. And a lot of his early things were first tested out on these little girls. And so she lived with the Butlers, and they had these toys from their time with Lewis Carroll that he had actually made by hand. He was a great craftsman, and he'd handmade these toys. He was a great craftsman, and he'd made these toys. And so every Sunday afternoon, my granny would talk about being allowed to go into the drawing room and play with these toys, Lewis Carroll's toys, and so she stayed there through the war, and it's this incredible time in Oxford where all these great writers and poets and these people who were allowed to not fight in the war on kind of academic reasons would writing and were there. So she lived with the Butlers and she met Alice. Alice was close with them and would come over and was this sort of enigmatic figure, like known and revered around Oxford. And she had tea with J.R.R. Tolkien, she told me about once. She said, by her memory, he was a friendly guy.
Wow.
And it was, so it was just this amazing time. She was around Oxford and just kind of absorbing it, but during this time of war and chaos and everyone and people dying. And so, when she talks about it, it's this very mixed kind of feeling of this beautiful time, but so underpinned with fear.
And how many years was she there? She was there for the entire war?
She was there for the entire war, pretty much. So I believe she was there for 5 years of the war, and then I think so. By the time the war ended, she'd been at C.S. Lewis's house for a bit, and she stayed on to manage. She was at that point, she was like 16, 17, and so she was managing his kind of the estate or their chickens and the likes. And so she ended up staying there for another year or two, I believe. And then at the end of that, she was accepted into RADA, the Royal Academy for Dramatic Arts, but couldn't afford to go. And C.S. Lewis paid for her entire education. He found out and he covered it, and she went and she became an early movie actress.
What an amazing story and an amazing life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was that time in Oxford, there were so many incredible people and incredible minds all working around, talking to each other. These weren't discrete authors. They all knew each other. They had writing groups. It was a real time of...
Can you imagine those writing groups? Wow, that would have been intimidating.
Yeah. You're going, I don't know if this white rabbit character is really working for me.
Yeah, and I don't think a closet is where you want the kids to go through.
Yeah.
I don't think no one is going to buy that.
Mm-hmm.
And the video that you sent me of your grandmother, what's that from?
That was just she's an incredible woman with incredible stories, and so a few years ago I sat her down and we just talked through her life and everything she'd done, and it was a really wonderful experience. It was something I wanted to do, to obviously to have the footage, but also just to talk to someone. Like it is such a privilege to get to talk to someone who's lived through wars and everything. I mean, 97's a lot of years.
Well, you're very fortunate in terms of being surrounded by so many creative minds and creative family members, and having a template, to base your life on and your creative aspirations. It's been really delightful to listen to you articulate what you've experienced so far in your life, and I really appreciated you working on this project. I hope you'll come back when your show is produced, and thank
you so much for having me. This was such an absolute treat for the day, and just fun to get into all this stuff.
Just to chat about it. So, thanks a lot, Jake.
Bye.